Hello and welcome to our program this evening. I'm Stephanie Gaspar, president of Kissimmee Valley Audubon Society, and appreciate everyone watching our program. Larry Rosen, one of our current board members, will also be joining the panel with us this evening. Last month, Dr. Andrea Ayala was our guest speaker. She talked to us about her research on viral transmission of disease between backyard chickens and wild birds in the Athens, Georgia area. It was very informative, and if you currently have backyard chickens, she recommends getting them inoculated against Newcastle disease. This is the last program of the season, and we will resume meetings in September. We are not sure if they will be in person, so please stay tuned for future announcements. Additionally, we are still seeking members to join our board of directors. There are various open positions, so please get in touch if you are interested. My board of directors and I would like to thank everyone for the support we received this past year. It was a big change switching our meetings to a virtual platform, but I am happy they were a success. Check out our other programs on our channel in case you haven't viewed them already. Stay up to date with our programs by checking our website, following us on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Before we begin, I would like to mention a few housekeeping items. Log into YouTube and type any questions you have in the chat. We will answer them at the end of the presentation. Tonight's topic about woodpeckers is sure to be amazing. Woodpeckers can be found almost everywhere, and it's important to protect their habitat. Our speaker tonight, Reinier Munguia, is a full-time naturalist and nature photographer based in Lakeland, Florida. His work has appeared in various publications, including books, magazines, and scientific publications. In his spare time, he leads photography workshops in exotic locations, including the Galapagos, Costa Rica, and Panama, among others. He spends a great amount of time documenting wildlife and their struggles in our constantly changing environment. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, Reinier. I will now pass it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Stephanie and Larry, for inviting me to talk one more time at Kissimmee Valley Audubon. So the subject for tonight is going to be one type of bird that a lot of people take for granted, and reality is probably one of the most important birds that we have. Just think about the essential work that these little birds can actually do, not just for themselves, but to actually a lot of other birds. So we're gonna go in details as to what makes them so unique, what are those adaptations that they have that allow them to do the kind of work that they do. I mean, when you think about woodpeckers, everybody associates woodpecker with birds that are actually hitting a tree, and they hit really hard with their beaks, and that's not something that is easy. So if you ever wanna try to hit the wall with your head and you see that it's kind of painful. So you wonder, how do they do it? Well, we're gonna go in details as to how they manage to do that. Now, the family Pisidae includes other woodpeckers, the write-necks, piculates. Piculates are really tiny woodpeckers. I would tell you that they can be the size of a sparrow and sometimes even smaller. And we also have the sapsuckers, are part of that big Pisidae family. There's about 210 species worldwide, and here in the United States or North America, we actually have 21 species, and they vary in sizes. You probably have heard about one of the extinct species, that is the ivory-billed woodpecker. That was the largest woodpecker in North America. Following that same line, we have the pileated woodpecker that is fairly big, and you can see when you find a pileated woodpecker, there's no way that you can confuse this with any other bird, just because of their massive size, their amazing sound when they call, and obviously drumming. That is one of the things we're going to learn. Why do they do it, and how do they manage to do this? So in essence, you have birds that can be as small as 3.5 inches and as long as 21 inches. They're mostly solitary with few exceptions, and that means that for the most part, these birds are going to be, the male and the female are going to be on their own until breeding time comes into play. And that's when the pairs actually get together again. They start working together to make sure that they are successful during the breeding season. The sexual maturity in most of them is 1 year old. And this is really important because a lot of woodpeckers don't get to live that long. If you know anything about lifespan of birds, you know that the larger the birds, the longer they get to live. So, for example, macaws, they get to live from 60 to 60 years. If you take, for example, an ostrich, gets to live about 50 years. So obviously size matters when it comes to lifespan in birds. So if you see a hummingbird, probably gets to live about 5 to 6 years. And impressively, some of the woodpeckers, especially the little ones like the downy, gets to live about 1.5 to 2 years max. So therefore, the ability to become sexual mature really quickly is a very important feature, and that's one of the things that they're able to do is be able to breed at the age of 1 year old. Usually, they lay from 3 to 5 eggs in most species. Um, for the most part, when you see pileated woodpeckers, you get to see sometimes 3 babies in a nest, sometimes even 4. About the same for the woodpeckers, like the red-bellied woodpecker, we get to see about 3 chicks in the nest. So that's about the average 3 birds. Both male and female, they incubate and they both care for the chicks. So you probably have heard that some species only the female takes care of the babies, like in hummingbirds. Hummingbirds, the male doesn't do anything. The guy is just lazy. He's just there to find a female. The female pretty much put together the nest, lays the eggs, incubates, and then come in and also feed the baby. So those guys don't do much. Um, and like I said before, the longevity varies by species and is related to size. So the smaller ones will have only 1 to 2 years. Average for woodpeckers is about 5 years for the mid-sized woodpeckers, and up to 15 years for the bigger ones, like the pileated and the um, other larger types of woodpeckers. Now, in this particular map, everything that you see in orange is actually areas where woodpeckers actually exist, or any Pisidae, meaning all kinds of different birds that are related to the woodpeckers, like the sapsuckers or the piculets. But something really strange happens in Australia, and some of the islands, the Indonesian islands, do not have any signs of woodpeckers. There's many theories about this, but I mean, some people say that the wood in Australia is too hard for woodpeckers. I don't know about that, but I could tell you that there's a lot of competitors in Australia because they have a lot of parrots, and parrots are also cavity nesters. Therefore, they are gonna be, in a disadvantage trying to compete against parrots that are usually bigger than woodpeckers. So that to me sounds more reasonable than claiming that the wood in Australia is too hard for woodpeckers. But that's the kind of stuff that you hear sometimes. Now, piculets are the really small birds, and they have short beaks compared to other type of members of the woodpecker family. They tend to find small bugs, especially like small nymphs of insects, or even caterpillars or grubs that live in the wood. So they're constantly moving through branches. Even thin little branches can have a meal for these little guys. So obviously, in a forest, like say in Costa Rica, where there's several species of piculets, they would not compete with the bigger woodpeckers because the type of food that they look for is much smaller and not something that will attract any of the larger woodpeckers that we have in Central America. So they really do not compete much with the other species, and that's why they can survive in the same area where the larger woodpeckers are. Now, the write-necks are really odd. These guys spend a lot of time on the ground. And you're going to find that some species of woodpeckers actually have this tendency to spend time on the ground. If you look for flickers, for example, flickers tend to hang out a lot on the ground, especially the western flickers. They like to look for food on the ground. Sometimes you might see even the red-bellied woodpeckers coming in and looking for acorns that fell from trees, and they hang out on the ground. But for the most part, they're going to be looking for stuff on the trees. During the winter, when they cannot really get that many insects, then they're going to depend on those seeds that they have learned to store. And we'll talk about that in a few. So we only have two species of write-necks, and that's the Eurasian and the red-throated write-neck. Now, this is a long list of woodpeckers. On the left-hand side, we have all the woodpeckers that we have in North America, and then actually on the left side, you have all the woodpeckers in the United States, and on the right-hand side, you have all the species that we have in Central America. So, and that includes some of the birds in the Caribbean. That's just to give you an idea how much more biodiversity there is in terms of woodpeckers in Central America and South America. And one of the reasons for that is the variety of trees and obviously the amount of different species of insects that live on those trees. If you go to the Caribbean, you're also going to find that every single island, at least on the larger Antilles, they're going to have, on the Great Antilles, they're going to have their own endemic species of woodpecker. So Cuba has one, they have two. One of them is the Fernandina flicker. Then Puerto Rico has their own Puerto Rican woodpecker, which I'm going to show you pictures later. So it's pretty interesting how they all are isolated geographically and have some similarities in terms of body shapes and stuff like that. They belong to the same genus in most cases, but each one of the islands has a completely different looking woodpecker. Now, when we talk about their adaptations, the first thing that comes to mind is how do they manage to basically get their food from the wood, from those really hard woods that we have, by actually hitting with their own heads, with their own beak. So obviously there has to be something going on with their skulls, with their brain, and how everything works out. Because imagine hitting with that much force, obviously you're gonna have headaches. And I don't know. I never ask a woodpecker if they have headaches, but I assume that they don't suffer much of that because otherwise they wouldn't be drumming or hitting wood all the time with their heads. They have a really specialized tongue. They have protective bristles around the bristle feathers right at the base of their beaks. They have a zygodactyl type of foot, meaning two toes forward and two toes back, which are essential to be able to climb on trees. We'll go in details about this. Then they have dual purpose rectrices, especially the number one and number one feather on their tail. They're really extremely hard, and we're gonna see that in just a few minutes. So when a woodpecker actually is hitting the tree looking for food, they're hitting down at about 1,000 times the force of gravity. So just think about it. A human being can actually survive an impact of between 46 and 100 Gs. And this guy is hitting the wood at 1,000 Gs. So that is pretty impressive. Woodpeckers can actually peck more than 12,000 times in one single day. So that's something that, I mean, not many animals go through that much frequency of stress related type of activities, because when you think about it, I mean, that has to put a lot of stress every time you hit the tree. They do that at an average of about 20 times per second. So when you hear a woodpecker drumming or hitting the wood, like drilling a hole, on average is 20 times per second. Now, the smaller the species, the faster the frequency. And that's how we can tell the difference between the noise produced by a pileated woodpecker, a red-bellied woodpecker, a downy woodpecker, and even a hairy woodpecker. They all have different frequencies as the speed that they actually hit the wood. So the energy transfer, believe it or not, most people think, well, but that hitting with their head, so all that energy on their head. Well, in reality, no. Most of the energy gets transferred. About 99% goes to the body, and only 0.3% is actually received by the head itself. Why is that? Well, they have a spongy skull. The bones are not totally fused and attached to each other, but there's a little play in between. They also have less cerebrospinal fluid, meaning that the brain is not floating in all this fluid, which will make you dizzy. If that was the case, probably will cause a lot of other issues. They also have the hyoid bones that protect the brain, and it's part of the structure that holds their tongue. We're gonna see that in a minute. Their brain doesn't have as much strong surfaces. I mean, they're not deep crevices on their brain. they're actually really nice and smooth when compared to the brains of other birds. They have bristle feathers and they have a nictitating membrane that serve to protect them every time they hit the wood. Those nictitating membranes are going to protect their eyes just like they do in other birds. These guys have a little thicker type of nictitating membranes than in other birds. They also have really strong neck muscles that allow them to really transfer all that power when they hit the trees all down to the rest of their body. So obviously, these are the things that make a woodpecker a woodpecker. Now, when we talk about their tongues are actually split right at the base, as you can see on these images, and they go all the way in a circle and go back and basically are attached to the nares on one side of the nares. This is also connected to the hyoid bones. This is what you see right here, the white section right here. And the hyoid is basically it's almost like a bony structure, and the tongue actually slides in there. And these hyoid bones also help maintain the brain in place. So it doesn't allow the brain to actually impact the skull. And that is one of the most amazing features that woodpeckers have that allow them to do what they do. Now, when you see their tongues are almost 3 times the size of their beak. And in some cases, the tip is actually kind of brushy and they can get things stuck on their tip of their beak. So why do they need such a long tongue? Well, this tongue can go anywhere. They can actually manipulate the tongue to go inside the wood and go searching for bugs. And once they reach some kind of grub, they actually that grub is actually gets stuck on the tip, and then they can drag it out, and that's how they manage to catch most of their food just by means of that really long tongue. Now, not all woodpecker tongues are created equal. There will be variations from some woodpeckers to others, and it all depends on what kind of diet they depend on mainly. By the way, woodpeckers are well known for also going after nectar. They like to eat fruits. They like to eat pretty much anything, including small lizards and even eggs. So you'll see that later. So the zygodactyl food that they have, this is not just unique to woodpeckers. Other birds have this type of arrangement. So parrots also have 2 toes forward and 2 toes back. And what that does, let me see if I can put this, is that it allows them to have a better grip when they when they are attached to the trees. So in the case of parrots, they need those to be able to move through branches in the forest. And in the case of the woodpecker, they need to be able to go and climb on the side of trees. So therefore, having 2 toes forward and 2 back allow them to do so. One of the toes, number 4, is actually even longer than all the other toes. And that is because it sits on the outside. So towards the outside where they can actually move around the tree, and they can move horizontally or they can move vertically thanks to that arrangement on their toes. Now we talked about the feathers on the tail earlier, and believe it or not, those tails are essential to the survival of a woodpecker, because as they climb on a tree, they actually use the tail to stand. It's almost like another set of legs that they have on the back end of their body, and that's how they can actually climb trees and hold on to one position without putting too much effort. The actual center of the rachis of that feather is extremely hard. They don't bend. They don't bend like other birds that the tail feathers would bend. These guys are solid. So if you ever find a woodpecker tail out there, a feather, go and take a look. You probably won't be able to bend them as easily as any other feather. And they're extremely pointy. In some cases, they almost have like 2 little barbs at the end that allow them to basically jam the tail on the actual bark of the trees where they eat. Here's one good example. That is a sapsucker. It's a yellow belly sapsucker. And here you can see the tail basically putting all the weight of the body on those tails, and then they're holding against the bark by means of those zygodactyl feet. Look how weird. They actually extend their feet outward, and that's how they manage to walk all over the place. When it comes to flying, woodpeckers also have to conserve energy. Most woodpeckers are not like, extreme flyers. They're not birds that like to go on long trips. They don't migrate that much. So most cases, the range of these birds is fairly small, and they move through the same area every day looking for food and new things that might have come up overnight. So they don't have a really huge range. Especially the smaller woodpeckers don't move that far. So in order for them to save energy while flying, most woodpeckers use what is called an undulation type of flight, where they go up and down, and they have the up when they put energy on their wing strokes, it goes up, then they put their wings together and glides all the way down, then they flap again 3 times, go up, and they keep on going. That is true for most smaller woodpeckers, downies, and all the red-bellied woodpeckers, the red-cockaded woodpecker. All those woodpeckers will do this type of undulating flight. But you can also see pileated woodpeckers that are much larger just fly on a straight line with no undulation whatsoever. That is because they have massive wingspan. They have really big wings, and they can sustain longer flight in just a straight line with no issues. But most other woodpeckers are going to follow an undulation type of flight pattern because it saves them a lot of energy. Now, there's some behaviors that are just specific, or well, not necessarily just specific to them, but is commonly found on the woodpecker family. Number one, drumming. Not many birds go hitting on a pole or hitting on a tree or on the sidings of your house, even on metal. Only woodpeckers do that. But drumming is not totally unique for woodpeckers. There's birds like the palm cockatoo in Australia that they actually use a stick and they drum. They actually hit the palm trees with a stick on their legs to just create sound. But in the case of woodpeckers, they actually use their beak. They hit that wood really hard, and they do it in a sequence really fast. And what is the meaning of drumming? Well, drumming is the way that they set up their territories. It's the way that they attract the female. So when breeding season comes in, that's when they're going to be doing the most drumming. Now, because they're territorial in a way, they want to select an area and protect that from anybody else. So woodpeckers, especially with pileated woodpeckers, you will see them sometimes hitting the strangest objects out there. I've seen them on top of light poles hitting the actual top of the lamp because the metal is really, resonates and create a really loud sound. So they will go and hit the metal just to make sure that the signal goes out further. So it's really unique. And sometimes you find people that come in and say, "Oh my, this bird is coming to my house and is basically drilling a hole on the sidewall, and I don't know what to do with this bird." Well, I'm gonna tell you, you better be concerned because there might be something else going on into your house. A lot of woodpeckers get attracted by sounds created by termites because that's a source of food. Once they find a termite mound, they can come in and eat all they want. So they can perceive sounds of these grubs moving and the termites moving inside the wood, and therefore they're gonna come in and start, trying to drill a hole on your wall. So keep that in mind. If you have a wooden house, and the woodpeckers are spending too much time on the side of your wall, think about it. Sometimes they get distracted by sounds created by household items that we have, electronic items or something that creates a similar sound to that of the uh, of the um, of the insects working their way through the wood, and they're basically attracted to your house. But in that case, you don't have to worry much. Now, another type of behavior is anting. And anting is kind of like you see the bird on the ground with the wings extended, and it sounds like they're sunning themselves. Well, they actually allow ants to climb on their body. And one of the theories behind this is that they do it so that they can come in and clean and help them get rid of a lot of things that live in their bodies. They get rid of all cells that are still stuck on their body, like skin cells. I don't know if you know, but most birds produce a type of powder that is just basically to keep all their skin fairly dry and keep the feathers nicely dry. So by allowing insects to come in and start going through your body, some of those ants will actually attack mites that are living in their feathers. So hunting is a fairly common type of behavior found in woodpeckers. Food storing. While that's not totally unique to woodpeckers, there's one particular species that is well known for the really large collection of acorns that they collect, and they actually drill holes and put them inside all trees, and that is that picture right there of the acorn woodpecker, basically filling this tree, this dead tree, with acorns that they keep for the winter. When they don't have any insects to eat, they have a nice collection, a nice stash of acorns that they can go back to and feed during the winter. So that is a fairly unique behavior of that particular species, even though pretty much every woodpecker will stash food. This particular case of the acorn woodpecker, well, he just collects mainly acorns. But as I said earlier, sometimes you'll find woodpeckers eating small lizards, um, caterpillars, all kinds of insects. They love insects. But even sometimes, like flickers will go on the ground and dig a little hole and find a worm. Well, they're gonna pull the worm and they're gonna eat the worm because that's pure protein right there. So this particular guy here is a red-bellied woodpecker, a female, and she's actually stashing a lizard egg that she found. Now, what she doesn't know is that that lizard egg might not be there by the time that she comes back to get it because the little lizard is going to hatch and walk away. But at least she's trying to store some food for later. And here's one thing that we mentioned earlier, while these guys they cannot sing. They cannot produce sounds like a singing songbird will do. So that's why they go back to drumming as the mean to communicate and attract their mates and basically define their territories. And they find anything that they can use to produce a louder sound. So it's not uncommon to find these guys hitting all kinds of things. And I tell you more, there's been situations where when the space shuttle program was going on, they had to cancel one time they had to cancel one of the launches because a woodpecker has started drilling holes in the insulation of the main fuel tank of the space shuttle. So they kind of pick whatever is attractive to them and they go after. So I have seen them hitting concrete, which I'm like, you must be not too smart, but I don't know, maybe he was just trying to collect some calcium. And how do they manage to do that without actually damaging their beaks? Well, their beaks are constantly growing. Like birds, all birds, their beaks are constantly growing. So they get to keep that shape because they're basically drilling holes on wood. And that's what keeps their shape all the time really nice. So they can go for wood, plastic, or even metal just to make noise. Now, most woodpecker can actually are kind of sexual dimorphic, meaning you can tell a male from a female. In most species, there's some subtle differences. And for example, the pileated, the female has a different coloring than the male. The male actually has what is called a malar bar or malar stripe. That is that red section right under the eye. The female doesn't have that. So that's how you can tell a male from a female. It's really hard to tell them by sounds, but there's sounds that are associated only to the male and sounds that are associated only to the female. In the case of the red belly, you have the male is the one that has all the red covering the whole head, while the female only the back section of the head contains the red color. So that's one way to tell male from female. Now, these two are basically breeding woodpeckers. So you can actually see their eyes had turned to red. That is also a common thing on woodpeckers. In many species, their eyes will turn red during the breeding season just because the hormones, progesterone and testosterone actually come in and make basically produce those changes in terms of their coloration. The reds become intenser or more intense, I should say, and the eyes also change color to red. Now, most species are monogamous, meaning that they're going to stay together for that particular breeding season. Doesn't mean that they're going to stay together for life, like many species like the sandhill cranes in Florida or like the bald eagle. No, they might change partners from one season to another. Obviously, a pair that lives in one particular area might be able to reconnect again for 2 to 3 years, but they don't have to be monogamous like for life. They only have to be for that particular season. They both build the nest, so male and female actually help. They both incubate. They lay from 3 to 5 eggs, even though there are some species that can lay up to 10 eggs. I don't know of any species in the United States that lay that many, but that is the record of eggs is about 10 eggs. On average, incubation time goes from 13 to 15 days, with most birds living close to 30 to 40 days, depending on the size of that particular species. Now, when it comes to the importance of woodpeckers, I mean, obviously they're controlling other species by eating all kinds of different grubs, bugs. So anytime that you have a beetle that eat trees, that drill holes on trees, well, the woodpeckers will be eating their grubs. So obviously they're helping reducing the amount of beetles that can damage our forest. So that's one of the number one functions of woodpeckers in the environment. They also eat a lot of fruits. Therefore, when they fly, they're dispersing fruits. One of my favorite things to watch is the red bellies actually eating elderberry fruits. So they hang out from all those elderberries and they just gorge themselves until they're about to explode. Or they go to a mulberry tree and they eat all the fruits there, and you see them, their faces all red. It looks like they're bleeding or something, and it's just because they've been eating on those fruits. So obviously, when they fly off and they poop, they're just dispersing a lot of seeds. So seed dispersal, spore dispersal from the spores from flowers that they rub against when they're feeding, all that is an essential ecological service that woodpeckers are providing to the environment. There are also environmental indicators. When you go into a forest and you find several species of woodpeckers coexisting, that's usually a sign of a really good and healthy type of forest. Obviously, you wouldn't have that many species or number of individuals in one area if there wasn't enough food to provide and if they didn't have the right trees for nesting and that kind of stuff. So they are indicators, but they're also what is called an umbrella or keystone species. If you know keystone species, one way to describe it that maybe you know is the gopher tortoises in Florida. Gopher tortoises, they dig these burrows that are used by mammals, reptiles, and even a frog that lives there that is called the gopher frog. So obviously the work of that tortoise helps all kinds of different animals. Well, woodpeckers do the same thing. Woodpeckers actually are an umbrella species because they support many other animals, including other birds. We know screech owls don't dig holes. They don't have any way to carve a hole on a tree. So therefore, they're using the nest left behind by pileated woodpeckers. If you see like titmice or you find great crested flycatchers, sometimes they take the holes done by either pileated or even red-bellied woodpeckers. Once the woodpeckers abandon that nest, then they come in and they raise their babies there. So obviously that is an important, really important job that woodpeckers are doing for many other species. Take, for example, the flying squirrels. Flying squirrels, they love to live on nests cavities that were produced by red-bellied woodpeckers. So obviously, there's a lot that these birds are doing for the rest of the wildlife and for the health of our forests throughout the United States and North America. Now, what are some of the causes of decline of woodpecker species? Well, obviously, deforestation. If you ask me what was the reason why we lost the ivory woodpeckers, chances are is because when the settlers came into North America, one of the first things that they actually exploited was wood, and we took down pretty much 3/4 of the forest in North America just to send over to Europe because Europe didn't have any. Europe basically destroyed all their forest in the making of big cities like Paris. That obviously, when you cut all the forest to build homes back in those days, then you're left with nothing. So they came to the United States or to North America and they took the stuff from here too. So a lot of the wood was basically cut down and shipped to Europe. So that might be one of the reasons why the range of the ivory woodpecker was pretty much lost in pretty much 200, 300 years. They were completely all gone. So that's mainly the cause for that. So we have modern forestry practices that do not allow for trees to mature. They do not allow leaving some strands of trees so that they age properly and that they can become useful for woodpeckers. The cutting of old trees, even in your own neighborhood. I mean, how many people are so scared about hurricanes? Oh my God, hurricanes are coming. We need to cut down our trees. Well, guess what? If you cut the trees, then you have no woodpeckers. I'm so, my street, they have cut so many trees. Guess what? All the woodpeckers come to my backyard. They have 2 oak trees there, 1 oak tree in the front. They love to come in. We have cherry trees that they love to come in and eat the fruits, the black cherries when they're fruiting. So, you got to do something to reduce our own impact on species. Obviously, the introduction of invasive and domestic species like the European starling, if they can be so devastating for woodpeckers because they compete for the same nesting cavities. So I've seen in many cases where the starlings come in and they evict the woodpeckers, they eat or destroy their eggs and they take over. So, kind of things that they're already there. So it's really hard to get rid of European starlings, but that's one of the things that is causing a lot of problems for some of the woodpecker species. Also, climate change. Obviously, if some of the forested lands switch to more of a dry type of habitat, or we lose those trees because of storms or whatever, those are obviously are going to put an impact on that population of woodpeckers that live within that area. Natural causes. Well, natural causes, we have predation by birds, Hooper hawks, greyhound owls. Greyhound owls love woodpeckers and they know how to get them from their cavities when they're nesting. Predation by reptiles like yellow rat snakes, but that's a natural cause. It's normal that happens from time to time. Competition for nesting cavities with the starlings, and nestling and egg predation by starling grackles and blue jays. Blue jays are really nasty. They eat almost anything, including baby birds and eggs of other birds. So here we go. Let's show you some of my favorite birds and favorite woodpeckers. This is obviously the pileated, the largest woodpecker in North America. And this one is a male. You can see the malar bar. This one is one of my favorites from Central America. It's a pale bill woodpecker. It's fairly similar to the pileated that we have here. It's about the same size and pretty loud too. Then we have the red-bellied woodpecker. Here's some people ask me, why did they call that a red-bellied woodpecker if the red is on the head? Well, no. During breeding season, you'll see the red on their bellies, and that's particularly more noticeable on the males like this one. Then this one is a Gila woodpecker. It's a Gila, yep, in southwestern United States. Red-headed woodpecker, we find them here in central Florida, especially when there's a lot of pine forest and there's some dead trees. You're gonna find these guys out there. The downy woodpecker, It's the smallest of the woodpeckers that we have in Florida. And the hairy woodpecker. The difference between these two is actually on the drumming sequence and the length of the beak. The length of the beak on the hairy is almost as long as the head itself, while the downy, the beak is smaller than the length of their heads. That's one of my favorites, the flickers, and this one is what is called the yellow shafter or the eastern race of the flickers. If you go to the western United States, then you have the tails are more red instead of yellow, and so are the primary feathers are red instead of yellow. Here's the western one, pretty cool. This one is another male. You can see mallard stripe there too. This is a female. Now this one is the red-cockaded woodpecker, one of the most critically endangered woodpeckers that we currently have in North America. This is one of my favorites, and they live in the western states of the United States, from I think all the way from western Canada south almost to California, Southern California, especially on the mountain sides. They like more of a high altitude areas, even though you can find them in coastal areas like the Monterey Bay. We found many of those guys over there. This particular picture was taken in Costa Rica, where they're also found at high altitude. This one is one of the sapsuckers, and I don't see the name here, but this is a red nape. Yeah, red nape sapsucker. Also from the forest in the western United States. I think this one I photographed in Grand Canyon. This one is the Williamson sapsucker. It's really cool looking. They have this yellow patch on their belly. It's almost like a square. It's pretty cool looking. The yellow belly sapsucker we have here in Florida, fairly common too. And there's something unique about these guys, is that they drill little holes that allow sap to actually come out of the bark, and they eat some of that sap, but the sap also attracts insects that get stuck, and they can come back later and actually eat the insects that get stuck in the sap. So therefore, that's why they're called sapsuckers. Lineated woodpecker from Central and South America, pretty big woodpecker too. This is a Hoffman's woodpecker. These guys are Melanerpes, that's a genus. So you will find that all the ones that are in the Melanerpes family, they look almost the same size, pretty much same type of patterns and colors, just in different areas. So this is just like seeing a red belly woodpecker, but they have yellow on the back of their head, they have yellow on their belly, and they have the same pattern on the back of their wings. This is a Puerto Rican woodpecker, which breaks all the rules of the Melanerpes because they're completely black on the back instead of having a little bit of a black and white. And they're solid red in the front, especially for the males in this case. That's a black cheek woodpecker, also a Melanerpes, so it follows the same body shape, same size. But you can see, as with most Melanerpes, they have white on their back. This is European green woodpecker. These guys are massive. They're huge. A little bigger probably than the pileated woodpeckers here. And they spend a lot of time on the ground. So this is one of those species of woodpeckers that really love to be on the ground, hopping around and pulling all kinds of grubs and worms from the soil. Now, here's some of the most colorful. Obviously, I don't have this picture, so I have to borrow from somebody else. These guys are from basically, most of them are from South America. I believe this one is from Indonesia, not totally sure. I mean, not from Indonesia, from Southeast Asia. Crimson mantle woodpecker. The yellow-fronted woodpecker from South America. The black cheek woodpecker, almost reminds me again of the pileated here. The greater spotted woodpecker, this is the most common woodpecker in Europe. It's fairly probably one of the few species that they have. Again, like I said, Europe has a lack of woodpeckers because probably there were more, but they went extinct because of the destruction of forests in Europe. Chestnut back, not backed. Chestnut back woodpecker. This one is from Costa Rica and Central America. Seen them in Costa Rica and Panama. And this is a woodpecker fight. I found this one to be really interesting. If you pay attention to what happened there, the two birds were fighting over a meal, and I guess one of them pulled the other's tongue. So the flicker seems to have the tongue of the red-headed woodpecker, and he's pulling it out like if it was part of the meal that he wanted. So kind of a freaky that that could happen. But yeah, this is one picture that I borrowed from National Geographic to show you how weird woodpeckers can be at times. Now, to end this program and before we go into our questions, I want to know if anybody knows by any chance, and this is something that you guys can leave a note on the YouTube chat room or on the comments, which species was the one that inspired Walter Lenz to create Woody the Woodpecker? I bet you guys don't know because, well, you can probably come to some conclusions based on that illustration, but you'll be surprised. Anyhow, Stephanie, if you're back in, we can come in back and try to go over questions.
Hi, yes, great presentation. And I have a quick little announcement to make. I noticed right when the presentation started, for some reason the comments were disabled, but about 5 to 10 minutes in, I fixed that. So if any folks were watching and wanted to write comments, refresh your page right now, and you'll see that comment chat box opened. And we did have a comment that said, by Jeannie, she said she had no idea so much of the wood in this country was exported to Europe. Wow, what a great ecological loss.
Yep. Unfortunately, we lost almost 2/3 of all the forest due to the exportation of wood to Europe back at, in the early days of colonization of this country.
Wow. So I'll give a moment or two for people to type in the chat who was the inspiration for Woody Woodpecker, which I grew up watching this and I don't know the answer to that. So this will be very interesting.
Well, you'll be surprised because then I give you the story when somebody give us the answer, I'll tell them why it was that particular woodpecker.
Okay. I do have one comment is the pileated woodpecker.
Nope. Sorry. That's what it looks like with all that red on the head and all that, but nope.
That's what I thought.
The illustration, but not the inspiration.
Larry, do you have any ideas?
No, that's what I thought. I thought it was a pileated. So.
Anyone else? Any guesses as what it can be?
Or if they have any questions about woodpeckers.
Yes. Type your comments or questions in the chat. Okay. While we're waiting for that, I do have a few questions that I came up with.
Okay.
One of them is, earlier you had showed a picture of the tongue stretched out with the skull.
Yep.
And I think it's so interesting how they could move it and it has the bristles at the end.
Right.
Do they often get stung or bitten by insects as they're searching for food?
Well, I will assume that from time to time, something will grab them. Like if you have a larval stage of a beetle, and those things have really nice molars and they can grab them. But that's why they are prepared to defend themselves in any way possible. I haven't experienced anything, but like you saw on that picture of the two, the flicker and the pileated, and one pulling the tongue on the other one, it seems that tongue is made to withstand a lot of stress. And like I said, even they can stab. In most cases, the tip is actually hard, and they can actually stab their prey with that tip, which is an advantage for a bird that depends on something that is hiding 2 inches under the bark. And like I said, they can control where the tongue goes. To me, it's just amazing that they can go through all the crevices looking for food. So, but that's what they do for a living. So I guess that's adaptation for you there at work. Yeah.
Absolutely. Excellent. Jeannie commented, maybe Woody Woodpecker was a Disney duck in disguise.
No, he wasn't. So I'll give you the answer. Okay, I'll
Oh,
give you the
one
answer.
more
Okay.
red-headed woodpecker.
Uh,
Someone else just chimed in.
just getting closer, but no. I can tell you that it was a medium-sized woodpecker. It's not the smaller, but it's not the large ones like the pileated. So if you want to let it go for a couple more minutes, if not, I'll give you the answer.
Okay, yeah, let's let people give more time. And I have another question in the meantime. When you mentioned the different fruits that they
Mhm.
eat, that's awesome. Do you know if they also eat the fruit from the American beautyberry?
You know what? I haven't seen one eating them, but I don't see why not, with the only exception that beauty berries tend to be really short bushes. So therefore, they're not forced to come down to eat when they have food that is higher. So obviously, if you've seen the elderberry, when they grow and they bloom, sometimes there can be 10 feet high. So I don't see why they cannot get those, but I personally have never seen them. I can tell you that among the birds that love the beautyberry, mockingbirds and gray catbirds, they love them. They're always there. So, but never seen
Yes.
a woodpecker eating those.
Okay. Well, I would say no one else had any other
That's
comments to the species for woody woodpecker. So, yes, let us know.
all right. So here's the answer. That guy there, believe it or not, you
Acorn.
wouldn't believe it, right? It's an acorn woodpecker. So here's what happened. Walter Lance had just married this lady, and they decided to go on a honeymoon. You know, he was based in California. He went to the mountains. And back in those days, you know, he was an avid hunter, so he would take his gun and everything and go up to the woods. So they arrived to this log cabin, beautiful place, and suddenly this bird came in and started pecking on the wood on the log cabin, and he couldn't take a nap. He was so pissed that this bird was making noise that he went and he grabbed the shotgun and he was ready to kill the darn bird. And the wife say, "Wait, honey, don't kill him. Let's become creative. Why don't you come out with a character? Let's put this into a cartoon." And that's how Woody Woodpecker, you know, he was a little pain in the rear as a cartoon. He was always making fun and making life impossible to people. But the real inspiration was the Acorn Woodpecker.
Hmm.
Go
Wow.
figure. Yep.
Very interesting.
Yep.
And speaking of the acorn woodpecker, I did have a question about them during the presentation. They store so many acorns, and are they able to keep track of where they put them all?
Well, woodpeckers are really good at keeping track of their cache. They are kind of like the scrub jays, but not as good as our scrub jays. So, meaning that probably a large percentage of everything that they hide gets lost. Now, if you ever watch them hiding their food, they're not dumb either. Most woodpeckers actually find places under a branch to store their food rather than on top, because on top water will hit it most often, therefore it will, get spoiled. And most squirrels will actually walk on the top section of the branch. So if you leave an acorn there stuck in a crevice on the bark, the squirrel will take it. But if I put it under, it's harder for other animals to find their stash. So they're really smart. I mean, I don't know what they will try to hide an egg of a lizard, unless they're gonna eat it within a day or two. But if they come back, a month later, probably that turned into a little lizard and walked away. But they tried.
Wow, very interesting.
Yep.
Do you have any questions, Larry?
No, it was a good talk. Good talk, Reinier.
Thank you,
Excellent.
Larry.
I do have a few more.
Okay,
While we're
fine.
waiting for anyone else to type any questions in the chat, another one is, how old must a tree be to attract woodpeckers?
Well, it depends on the woodpecker. So, for example, obviously, we're taking in consideration that sapsuckers are members of the woodpecker family. So, a sapsucker will take a really nice living tree. They don't have to wait for the tree to be old, because they're going there to actually set up a set of traps by drilling holes and allowing the sap to come out. They take some of that sap, but reality, they're waiting for all the bugs that are going to get stuck there too. And in fact, there's a relationship between the sapsuckers and hummingbirds. Hummingbirds actually come in and follow sapsuckers so that they can actually steal some of the bugs that are stuck on the actual sap. So um, so obviously, for depending on the species, when they really start taking or using a tree in its maximum form. So obviously, for nesting purposes, they're going to be looking for older trees, trees that are already easy to get through and drill a hole. I mean, when you have to drill a hole that is, a cavity that is, pretty much about 14 inches deep and about 7 inches or more wide, you're gonna wait for that tree to be dead. So that's the case of pileated woodpeckers, and they take a lot of light poles. I mean, I have light poles in one section here close to where I live, where every single light pole has a pileated hole. Sometimes there will be 3 pileated holes. So that means that the same pair doesn't go back to the same hole every year. They might build a new one, and they might have 3 in the same pole. Obviously, that's a big problem for the electric companies because that makes the pole really weak, and eventually, when a storm comes through, the whole thing breaks in half. But there's different times for different species as to when they start using a tree. Yeah.
Excellent. I have another comment from Flavia, and she said, "What are some species of trees that you suggest we plant in our backyards in Northwest Florida to help support the survival of the woodpeckers in the wild?" And thank you so much for your presentation.
You're welcome. So any fruiting tree is good for woodpeckers because, like I said, they're not only eating insects, they also depend on a lot of fruits. So they love to eat mulberries. That's one thing that if you have a mulberry tree that produces fruits, you're not always that lucky because you have to have the right tree. You have to have a female tree, I guess. So they can. It's one of those species that not all trees are gonna produce. But and Larry probably knows more of that because he likes plants more than I do. But palm trees are really great for woodpeckers, especially they don't have to be big palm trees, but because they lose their top from time to time for through storms and stuff, people automatically go and they cut them. Well, it's a really nice soft wood that a lot of our woodpeckers use. So when the top is gone, don't go cutting the tree. Leave it there. The woodpeckers will come in and make a home out of there, especially the little guys like the downies. They love nesting on the smaller type of palm trees. Um, like I said, anything that produces fruit, and don't cut all trees. The problem is that people automatically, or if you're gonna cut it, trim the branches and leave the main trunk available because a lot of different wildlife will benefit from these decaying trees. As long as it doesn't become a problem for you in terms of falling on your property, on your house or something, let the tree go through its whole process of decaying because all these birds will actually use that.
Great. And there's another question by Jeannie. Should we leave dead trees standing for the woodpeckers?
As long, like I said, as long as it doesn't pose any threat to your property, there's no need to take a dead tree out. It will provide for not only them, it will provide for squirrels, for flying squirrels, for the snakes that get to live in them. There's like, for example, one of my favorite snakes is a scarlet king snake. They love dead trees. They actually go in between the bark because of the kind of food that they look for, and they love being in there because also lizards lay their eggs there and they hide under the bark. Therefore, they have a perfect microhabitat. A dead tree is a living tree.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Even in my yard, I have a pile of logs and branches that I'll use for our little to do a fire.
Right.
But this dead pile attracts
Mhm.
woodpeckers. They'll come
Oh
down
yeah.
to the pile, then go
Yep.
right back into my oak trees. But I
Yep.
constantly see them on the dead wood pile.
Right. And it's a good practice to every time that you cut vegetation, don't put it outside to be taken to the landfill. Actually create a nice pile in the back, and a brush pile is one of the best places for a lot of birds, including our Carolina wrens. They love to go in there and look for insects. So you're just creating you're giving them a little help by providing another feature in their habitat.
Absolutely. And one more question. This was very early on, talking about how there were no woodpeckers in Australia. And I saw on the map that Wallace's line, where there's many species that are
That do not go that way. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And do you have any personal theories as why there aren't any in Australia?
Well, it probably has something to do with the same way that pretty much all marsupials live in Australia and mainly in New Zealand. Probably has to do with the way that the Earth actually started to separate and leaving some organisms isolated from the rest. And that's possibly what caused then the difference in vegetation. I mean, if you go to Australia, even though they have really nice, humid, temperate type of forest, for the most part, Australia is a really dry land. So obviously, when you think about it, if that happened at an early stage of the Earth being separated into continents, as we know them today, there could be a lack of enough plants and vegetation that support all the extra life that you need in order to sustain woodpeckers. So a woodpecker flies into that area, say from a nearby Southeast Asia, probably won't find enough to survive in terms of food because they go through really long periods of drought where obviously, you know, as we all know, if it doesn't rain, there's no insects. So if there's no insects, there's nothing for them to eat. So there could be a variety of things. And just think about it. Australia by itself is, I will call it the lost continent for what I care, because if you want something really strange, go to Australia. You'll find them there. I mean, we still have birds there that nest, they dig holes and they lay eggs underground. So that cannot be more reptilian than anything else. So something definitely happened there on that Wallace's line. And Wallace, when he wrote everything about his theory of evolution, he was the big competitor to Charles Darwin. He obviously he hit the nail way probably before Darwin, but he didn't get published. So if you read his stories, you get answers like that as to why there's such a big difference between this section and the rest of the world. And just think about it. When you go to Galapagos, it's a new set of islands. Those islands are not that old. We're talking about 3.2 million years old at the oldest one, 3.7 maybe. There's no woodpeckers, and there might never be woodpeckers because those islands are so isolated from the mainland that for a woodpecker to fly 600 nautical miles to be able to colonize that, and you will not need only one, you will need at least 20 of them before you can start a population in Galapagos. So chances are those islands will never have a woodpecker. So those are the kind of things that probably play a big role on how things happen there. Now, when you go and take in consideration how the islands in the Caribbean were formed, then you can see that, okay, yeah, that is possible that a woodpecker started in Cuba and moved all the way into Puerto Rico. And over time, they develop into complete different species because there's that connectivity. We're not as far and isolated. So I think it all has to do with, at the end of the day, it has to do with geology more than anything.
Excellent. Great response. Is there any way, if people want to get in touch with you in regards to the program or anything else, what's the best way people can contact you?
They can go to my website, is wildstockphotos.com. And there's a form there. They can send me an email directly through the form. That's probably the easiest way to find me.
Okay, excellent. And I'll add that website to the comments for anyone checking the website. They'll be able to see that easily.
If they have any questions about birds, feel free anytime. I like to answer and give at least what I know. So.
Excellent. Thank you to everyone that was viewing the program tonight. Thank you for your questions and comments. And Larry for joining our panel. We appreciate having you here. And Thank you again, Rainier. Wonderful
welcome.
program. I love
Yeah.
woodpeckers. I feel like we don't hear enough about them.
I
So
know.
we're happy to close the program, our season, our 2020-2021 season with woodpeckers. And
Thanks,
thank
Rainier.
you very much.
See you guys later. Thank you for having me.
You're
Bye.
welcome.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Take care and stay safe.
Thanks, you too. Bye bye.